We've often heard that we learn nothing from history, but the truth is we actually do learn something from history. We learn that no one learns from history, but we need to start learning from history now if we're going to avoid the worst missteps of the past and take advantage of the inspiring things our country has done. In American history, one of the more inspiring acts took place 245 years ago. The colonies revolted in 1776 against King George and Britain. At that time, politics in the colonies were anything but clearly in favor of revolt. Many colonials were sick and tired of King George, but an impressive number were more than happy to stay with the old arrangements and submit to faraway British rule. Well, in stepped Thomas Paine, one of the heroes of our revolution. In 1776, he summed up the mood of the era. These are the times that try men's souls. We can forgive him for failing to adopt the politically correct vocabulary demanded by our times and agree that his times were perilous indeed. No one was sure how things were going to turn out. To those who were willing to defy the king, the future looked dangerous. To those who were happy to stick with the king, the future looked dangerous. Either way, Paine was right. The people were living in trying times. When the founders chose independence, they started a long war that led to a famous document known as the Constitution of the United States. That document secured certain rights. Some of those rights had already been hinted at in the document that had launched the revolution itself, the Declaration of Independence. Now to the point. There are intimate links between the independence of the colonies and the independence of something else, the independence of the individual citizen. Both our country and our citizens gained their independence because of the revolution against Britain. Well, an independent country wants to act in line with its own principles for its own benefit and for the benefit of its friends. But that independent country will fail if its people lack the independence of spirit and action the Constitution guarantees. In other words, a country that is independent of foreign tyranny demands another form of independence. Its people must be largely independent of the very government that rules their independent nation. Otherwise, the government will suppress its citizens just as badly as any foreign nation could manage. A government is so close to its citizens that it could tyrannize them even more than any foreign power. The people would then have traded in one tyranny for another. But big government alone is not the worst enemy of freedom. Excessive government power poses a special threat when it forms alliances with powerful private interests. This partnership will eventually undermine the liberties the founders wrote into the Constitution that forms the framework of all our laws and much of our lives. In fact, these alliances can lead to dictatorship. And in our times, government is forging partnerships with powerful private corporations in various media. We see this partnership very clearly in the intimate links between government and irresponsible television journalists. American citizens are now in imminent danger of letting this partnership steal their happy independence of spirit and thought. And by the way, happiness is one of the lofty goals of the Declaration of Independence. You don't have to be what a gun-toting, Bible-thumping right-winger, so-called, is to realize this. Nor do you have to be a rich liberal, so-called, infatuated with the government of China. Either way, just a moment of even shallow reflection will convince you that we've entered dangerous times. We've all heard about the enraged mob, for instance, that invaded the Capitol early this year. The president of that time incited that mob. That, at least, is the story we hear on many television shows marketing themselves to alleged liberals. In that audience, many shallow thinkers admire untrained pseudo-journalists telling fairy tales on their shows. Those fables are substitutes for Grimm's fairy tales about hideous monsters in the woods. Biased entertainers posing as journalists are now appealing to vivid fantasies lurking in the unconscious minds of many of those liberal viewers. These television personalities have incited feelings they love to blame on the departed president, who, they say, is now planning his evil comeback from the bunker of his Floridian mansion. Well, as part of its partnership with media, the current government has conducted an unconstitutional second impeachment, an unsupportable Nuremberg trial. That trial was designed to lock the former president out of politics for the rest of his life. That's one way that irresponsible journalists have joined with the current government to seize political power. But there's more. And that stems from the brilliant psychological techniques that modern marketers love. The departed president was painted by many media in the basest possible colors. There were no shades of pink, green, or magenta. There were only black and white, with a generous portion of poison added to the paint. This portrait made that president look like a combination of Satan and your own worst enemy. Too many people still look with primal fear on this apparition and find it hard to stop thinking about the evil it represents. And concerned with evil in this form, viewers are being unconsciously conditioned to believe the commercials that are the real product of news programs and broadcasting today. There's still more. Does the unflattering portrait of the former president fit that man in most ways? Or does it actually reflect the worst aspects of the people who found the former president so revolting? Sigmund Freud pointed out that people often project their own worst qualities onto a person they hate. It'll be fascinating to see what horrors people project onto the new president. After all, he's sure to make mistakes as he stumbles into one crisis after another. What will people see in him as he reveals the less savory aspects of his own personality? And how long can the new president count on the subservience of the media in hiding his moral failings and his physical and mental weaknesses? All right, let's look at a second part of the government's new partnership with the media. This threat lies in a curious parallel between the Capitol riot of earlier this year and the beginning of Hitler's Third Reich. But it's not the parallel that's obvious. Just after Hitler took power, someone burned the German Capitol building, the Reichstag. Hitler blamed the fire on the opposition, and he used it as an excuse to secure emergency powers. Those emergency powers ended the liberties of the German people and led to the Second World War. In our country, we now are hearing calls from pseudo-journalists and irresponsible politicians for similar emergency measures. Unqualified politicians and media stars are calling for a crackdown. They want a crackdown not just on the Capitol rioters, but on their alleged allies in the media and Congress as well. Some of these unqualified politicians and media types are even demanding the elimination of one network that opposes the majority in Congress. Let's hope they don't scare up a Führer to take advantage of our fears. This is what can happen when the media snuggle up too closely to government. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's minister of propaganda, left a legacy we dare not forget. Thinking people may very well consider some opposition views eerily wacky, but in a democracy, the last thing we want is a crackdown on the free expression of views that sound wacky today but may sound brilliant tomorrow. Brilliant ideas often have offbeat beginnings. In the politics of democracy, we have to tolerate offbeat people and offbeat views. Otherwise, we rob ourselves of the wisdom often inherent in unusual ideas put forth by unusual people who dissent from the dominant view. But we've entered a time when too many voices in government and media are calling for precisely this kind of action against dissenters. These voices call for us to see insurgent fanatics lurking around every corner. Certain disturbing facts indicate that we're forgetting the insidious powers of state propaganda, especially when it insists there's only one way to think. The new president is unstintingly calling for unity in the nation. Well, what he apparently fails to recognize is that democracy requires dissent far more than it needs unity. Contrary to the beguiling song the president is singing, the goal of democracy is nothing like unity. Unity in politics too often means conformity. Instead of seeking unity über alles, democratic government must deal readily and skillfully with disagreement, dissent, and all other forms of nonconformity. In quieter times, Henry David Thoreau writes that some free-thinking people hear the beat of a different drummer. Imagine if he had suggested that a team of government psychiatrists toss those people into an asylum. That's the unavoidable result of calls for unity at the expense of calls for dissent. Not that unity is atrocious when properly viewed and applied. The best form of unity is an underlying spirit among the government and the people that insists on reasonable ways to express and manage dissent. In a proper spirit of unity, the procedures for handling dissent must be agreed on by all factions of government and by all groups and individuals among the people. But the ends of dissent, the decisions hammered out by people of varying views, must emerge only after vigorous debate. To insist on unity of opinion as the goal of government is to imitate Stalin, Hitler, and Mao. Their power would not have been possible without the collusion of the media and phony journalists who joined their cause and insisted on unity of thought and expression. Beyond government's unsavory partnerships with pseudo-journalism on TV, there's another looming partnership that confronts our freedoms. Government and high-tech corporations are teaming up to threaten these freedoms in brand new forms. Part of the danger stems from the recent and eerie phenomenon known only in our times. That looming Frankenstein is called by the friendly name Silicon Valley. In this happy imaginary valley dwells sprightly new media with millions of fans. In mindless bliss, these fans hand their thoughts, emotions, and souls to electronic devices. Those devices feed these fans to corporate technicians, chieftains, and marketers with preposterous power and wealth. In this connection, let's look at the worrisome implications of the high-tech term follower. It designates people who too often pay slavish attention to their idols on twittering social media. It comes as a shock to see these idols bragging about the number of people who follow them around. Where there are hordes of followers, there may one day be Führers, leading them astray. The German word Führer, after all, means nothing more than leader. In human history, millions of such followers have demanded a leader who eventually seduces them to a cliff they voluntarily leap off. In this way, a new conglomeration of social media and other high-tech forces have seized a new kind of political power. That Überpower doesn't just put on shows that happily divert attention from the crises of our times. Social media are now steering government for their own greedy desires for money and power. Social media have already started favoring loyal political customers while kicking dissenters off the screen. They do this in partnership and with the connivance of government. Social media giants are flooding politicians and parties with campaign contributions. The government shields high-tech firms from regulation to secure their loyalty through the majority party's pursuits. These anti-social media have become a force that hovers above and beyond Washington, D.C. They act like a monarchy that waves to the common folk from the balconies of their palace. Their goal may well be to silence thinking people who dissent from the goals of big government and big corporations. In effect, we are dealing with a new King George. This new monarch stealthily appears in three guises, three outfits, three roles. The new King George poses as the head of a social medium of 1 billion faces, as the head of internet searches, and as the head of twittering services for computers and intelligent phones. As subjects of this new King George and the monarchy he heads, we the people have resurrected the very power the founders cast off. This new monarchy, with castles sprinkled over Silicon Valley, has seized nearly all the power it needs to set a new and unfortunate course for the nation. We can do worse than to cast a suspicious glance at the power of government, but we need to augment this suspicion when government allies itself with partisan journalists and the billionaire bosses of new high tech. The time to stop this insidious march of monarchical malevolence is now, as one of the founders pointed out, and not later. There is no need to resist tyranny when it's in full bloom. If we wait, it's too late. The time for resistance comes at the very beginning of tyranny. And so right now is the time to break up Silicon Valley in every sense of the word. It's time to convert social media and other high-tech corporations to public utilities. We need to regulate them the same way we regulate electricity companies and other public services. And we need to forbid them from making campaign contributions, which are little more than bribes, in congressional and presidential elections. We must compel the mass media to run campaign ads for free and run them for a strictly limited time. Now, to understand this more clearly, we can revisit President Dwight Eisenhower. He brilliantly warned the country about the encroaching power of corporations in partnership with government. Eisenhower referred to the military-industrial complex. But today, we should enlarge his warning to include a government-corporate complex. This partnership flies in the face of our best ideals. It cheapens the nobility of Abraham Lincoln's words. In the Gettysburg Address, Lincoln praised government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Government for high-tech corporations will not reach Lincoln's goal. These are indeed trying times. We, the people, now face a sad ending, perhaps, to America's long march to independence. We've long enjoyed independence from the tyranny of foreign powers and from our own government's sometimes suspiciously undemocratic strivings as well. It's time now to add irresponsible television networks and high-tech corporations, especially when they collude with big government, to the list of powers we need to resist. As our friend Thomas Paine went on to say, The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country, but he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Quite a modern sentiment from a man who helped liberate a people in 1776. Let's hope that Paine's words inspire thinking people to learn something from history before it's too late.